Welcome to Traffic Jam, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Mike Westergren. This episode has been brought to you by the Traffic Club of Chicago. Today, our guest is Ted Prince. Ted is a co-founder and the Chief Strategy Officer of Cool Express, a startup dedicated to rail intermodal transportation of temperature-controlled freight. Ted has over 40 years experience in the transportation industry, and he's worked in all surface freight modes in numerous functional areas. He also had his own consulting company. He is a past chairman of the Intermodal Association of North America and was a founding board member of the University of Denver's Intermodal Transportation Institute. Ted has also written over 400 articles and columns. With that, thank you very much for joining us today, Ted.
Mike, it's great to be with you.
So how did you get your career started in transportation logistics?
It literally involved someone taking my resume to a Rolling Stones concert and somebody agreeing to interview me, and they offered me a job. It was at Conrail in the finance department. As my dad said, it's only a first job. Here we are.
It's a very unique way.
Absolutely.
So what keeps you excited about the work you do every day?
Well, intermodal is a really dynamic industry, and it takes in different modes, different functions, and history keeps repeating itself. When I started in 1978, that was right before the second fuel crunch, and intermodal was going to solve all the fuel problems, and it was the economic and fuel efficient way to handle freight, and we're still working with that. But I'd say every day is an adventure. They're constantly dealing with challenges and opportunities and trying to make lemonade out of lemons.
How are you and your business adding value to the supply chain?
Well, I think that intermodal is, as Gloria Swanson said, we're ready for our close-up, but sometimes we just can't seem to get out of the way. What we've seen in the freight market in the last couple of years is a lack of capacity. We've seen increasing awareness of the environmental and ESG. People 30 years ago, no one knew what EDI was. 5 years ago, no one knew what ESG was. We now all know it. Our investors and our customers and everyone is demanding it. Intermodal provides all that. But it's a challenge because it's doing a lot of little things correctly. And the challenge is, even if all of your stakeholders are at 90%, success, given the number of participants, intermodal is a team sport. If everyone delivers at 90%, it's not too long when you're delivering to the customer at about 5%. So it's not a single hitch and haul, but it's got capacity, it's got resiliency, it's got the ability to be what it needs to be, and that's what it does, and we're part of it.
What is one of the biggest challenges you've experienced throughout your career that you'd like to share today?
I would say maybe we can answer that in two parts. The first thing is, in terms of the biggest challenge, starting Cool is clearly the biggest challenge. I remember having lunch with a friend of mine when I was talking about this, and he looked at me, he said, well, Ted, this sounds like a great idea. You seem to know your business, but remember that 95% of all startups fail. So, here we are 7-8 years later, and we're going well, and we're looking at continued growth, investment, and transformation of the company. I would say that even before we got the chance to run the startup, we had to get it funded. And there's just not a lot of money out there for cold industrial startups. If you want to go out and you have some tech solution, high tech, biotech, plenty of money out there. Ironically, we were trying to raise, $10 to $20 million, and that was very hard to find. On the other hand, we had people that would gladly give us $200 million to go out and buy an existing company, what they like to call a platform. But the challenge was that the ones you wanted to buy weren't for sale, and the ones for sale you didn't want to buy. So we were very fortunate through another sort of serendipitous occurrence. We hooked up with Tiger Infrastructure Partners. They invested. Barings came in later and supported us. They've been, you know, long-term, patient, good investors. So I would say just getting Tiger to where it is probably the biggest thing I've ever done.
What was one of your biggest accomplishments you've experienced in your career?
There have been a lot of successes along the way. There, um, starting new things. 30 years ago, um, the CNW, Chicago Northwestern, before it was purchased by the UP, needed to expand. We had the opportunity to be the first customer into Global 2, and we experimented with a car-to-car rework model, which has been emulated subsequently in Northwest Ohio before CSX shut it down. Everybody said it wouldn't work. I had actually just completed my graduate degree, and I had written developed a model to look to see how intermodal could increase its exposure in terms of the markets it could compete the truck with. And we're a big company, but using the hub and spoke model, we were able to grow our domestic business 300% in about 18 months. I wouldn't put myself in the class with Fred Smith, but there are opportunities when academic and the real world there's a confluence there, and when it's successful, um, original ideas can flourish. And I would say that that's probably a model that we need to look at again. This car to car. I've written about it, especially in the international business. You have a situation on the West Coast where the port model is broken, the on-dock model is broken. In Chicago, the crosstown model is broken. So we all keep talking about what we're going to do. We're really living in Einstein's world of insanity. We're just doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So there's a lot of opportunities in intermodal to look at things and try new things. I had a boss who used to tell me, he was from Chicago, by the way, nothing holding you back but fear.
What are you looking forward to the most?
Well, right now at Tiger Cool, we're working on this thing called Wallula. It's in southeastern Washington. It used to be a warehouse facility that was built by Rail-X to provide an express system for perishables and boxcars, sort of back to the future. Then the UP purchased it, and through various reasons, the UP shut it down. We're completing our negotiations with the lease to buy to not only buy the warehouse, but to actually build an intermodal ramp there. And what's exciting about this is I believe that this ramp will really serve as a model elsewhere, perhaps throughout the world, because we're combining eastbound and westbound, short haul and long haul, ISO and domestic. And when you look at the Inland Empire, there was a story about how a major big box firm had just built 1.5 million square foot warehouse distribution center in Southern California. Edison said, well, we're burning down half the state, so the power will probably be ready in a year and a half. You look at Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon, that looks to me like the Inland Empire from 25 years ago. And they've got land, they've got labor, they've got water, they've got electricity. I think that's going to be the new Inland Empire. And we see a model where we can run short haul imports in ISO boxes into our facility, have them translated into 53s to the rest of the world, Our boxes will go in there, and we can run a much more efficient operation. Today, we send our driver out of Portland or Seattle. They drive out to that area to pick up apples, pears, frozen French fries. That's 200 plus miles east, 200 miles west. We put it back on a train. It goes 300 miles east. That's 700 miles, and we're right back where we started. So, which while all of those miles go away, it's a more efficient product. It's a more truck friendly product because you don't have to worry about taking exports into the port and going through the pass. It's a real win-win opportunity, we think, and really we've been very fortunate that all of the stakeholders that we're working with, the railroads, the port, everyone, is very supportive of it, and we're looking forward to having this running by the end of the year.
No, sounds good. Before we conclude, do you have any closing thoughts, and how should any of our listeners get a hold of you?
Well, you can find me at Ted at Tiger Cool Express. You could probably Google me on the web or in LinkedIn, and you can find me. I would just anybody that's ever worked for me, and there are a lot of them out there, and a lot of them are very successful. Um, we once tried to hire this person, and she wanted to interview people who used to work for me. So I gave her some names, and she talked to them. She said, "Well, they all said the same thing." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, there's two things they all said about Ted." They said, "One is if you fail to plan, you plan to fail." And the second one, the Tedism, is that vision without a plan is an hallucination. And I think when we look at what's going on today in our industry, I think both of those sayings have a certain amount of merit. All we hear about is there's that scene in Casablanca where Claude Rain shuts down the casino, shocked that there's gambling as the croupier is handing him his winnings. And everyone's so surprised. But our system has been flashing red for 20 years. And, we have the four C's: COVID, China, chassis, congestion. All of those were foreseeable. And we didn't do anything about it. About 20 years ago, I wrote a paper after 9/11 because I remember reading the 9/11 report. I said to myself, you could take this report and just take out security and replace it with transportation, and you've already got the after action analysis. Failure of imagination, problems with government, nobody understands the issues, it's too complicated. And our business is complicated. And what we're seeing from the government right now, it's pretty terrifying because nobody really understands freight. Freight, people, government deals with passenger by saying, I'm going to put a traffic light here, I'm going to add a lane on the interstate. We can't do that with freight because it moves in corridors, it moves globally, and you have to think about how it spans many different areas. And I would say on a bipartisan basis, we're just failing the citizens and failing our industry.
What kind of role do you think that government should play, if any, within the transportation logistics sector?
What we need is a coordinated strategy. So when we talk about freight, it's hard to talk about freight without talking about security, the environmental, globalization, tax policy, mobility, infrastructure, commerce. Um, and so you have to think about what this means and what do we want. And you talk about globalization, right? And everyone's, there's a lot of, I would say, revisionist history, but you have the problems that the benefits and the costs are sort of asymmetrically distributed. Everybody could go to Walmart and get things cheaper. But if you were in a textile mill in the South and your job was offshored, you're much more impacted. So this idea that we can wave a magic wand and reshore and bring things back. It's ridiculous. It took 30 years to build what we've got. It's going to take us another 30 years to replace it. So government needs to be the honest broker, but it's very hard to do when funding is formulaic, when they're earmarks. Um, it takes years, and that's before you even get into the zoning issues. Um, and what you have to realize is they really need to call out what's not working. So, for instance, every time that the president and Secretary Buttigieg go out and stand with the port directors in LA and Long Beach, they're doing a disservice to our industry because those port directors, they only move one thing: money. If you listen to them, you would think that they were actively involved in moving things. They're not. The media has failed us. When 60 Minutes has a big, segment on Sunday night talking about transportation, and they don't have a single transportation provider there, they're not getting the story out. And then you've got just all of these people now that everybody's a subject matter expert, and there's a lot of ignorance out there, and that just gets recycled.
It's a lot easier for people to voice their opinions nowadays, that's for sure.
Well, there's nothing wrong with opinions, right? And in a free society, that's important. But what's challenging is that it what is a news source now? What is journalism? Journalism does have a certain ethical core, which is that if they get something wrong and it's pointed out, you correct it. So there have been things I've seen that I've reported, and the corrections have been so noted. But you've got others that just spew nonsense out there, and when challenged, they just ignore it. So we really, collectively have to hold our industry to a standard where what we're saying makes sense, can withstand scrutiny, can manage what you can measure, and we're not doing that. Part of the problem is we really can't manage because we can't measure transportation. Um, there's a thing called BTS, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. It's pointless. They have a census. But if you think about what we do, especially with intermodal, to get meaningful intermodal data, you have to go out to different silos, different sources, and in effect put Humpty back together again to understand end to end what's happening. And we don't have that. In Chicago, you see all of this congestion, but you don't know if they're crosstowns, you don't know if they're pickups and deliveries, you don't know if they're chassis splits. We have no granularity, we have no end to end data. And you ask what the government could do, that would probably be a first start, to go out and understand how transportation is moving end to end. Because I would tell you, they have no idea. I'll just give you one example. There's a lot of talk about what the impact was of the Panama Canal. And I was fortunate enough to be a consultant to the Panama Canal to develop their intermodal model. And they thought that you were going to have this RIPI, reverse IPI, where things would come through the canal and from Asia, and you'd serve Chicago and all these points. And that was kind of nonsense, and they ultimately realized that. But you have all of this talk about, well, the East Coast is one, because you see the volumes on the East Coast going up. Well, most of that is not from Panama, it's from Suez. And nobody really imagined that you'd ever have service from China to the East Coast via Suez. It was always thought that Singapore, the subcontinent, was the breaking point. But more importantly, nobody's looking at the data. And everybody talks about, oh, the IPI volume is down. Well, the IPI volume is down, but the domestic volume is up. And what do they produce in Southern California other than movies? Nothing. So all of that cargo coming out of Southern California was previously waterborne cargo, anywhere from 80 to 90%. But nobody really talks about it. It's like magic, but that is what's happened with the imports. And the reason for that is you have a proliferation of DCs, and that's what the market is moving to. But it's just too complicated, doesn't fit in the soundbite, and the challenge for ignorance is I can't explain it because it's complicated. Well, it's a complicated world. We expect government to solve complicated problems.
So true. Ted Prince, thanks again for being a guest on Traffic Jam. And we look forward to publishing this episode soon.
Okay, Mike. Well, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Take care.
If you want to learn more about the Traffic Club, please visit our website at www.traffic-club.org. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoyed this episode of Traffic Jam.